Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 13th episode of Dishin with Democracy. Today's episode is on combating systemic racism and election education. The goal is to emphasize the importance of this issue by discussing and hearing the perspectives from our guest. To start, I'll introduce myself. My name is Isabella. I'm a senior majoring in political science. I'm on the pre-law track, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently an undergraduate coordinator here at the Center for Civic Justice. And I'm super excited to be here with you. And we also have some team members that I will introduce.
Hello, everybody. My name is Narissa Martinez. I am a senior majoring in political science with a minor in philosophy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an intern at the Center for Civic Justice.
Hi everyone, my name is Anu Irfan. I'm a double major in international relations and economics. My pronouns are also she, her, and I'm an intern at Center for Civic Justice.
Hello, my name is Rindy Paul. I'm a freshman majoring in political science. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an intern at the Center for Civic Justice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Antonio Rios. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior majoring in political science with a minor in English, and I am currently an intern here at the Center for Civic Justice.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for introducing yourselves. Now joining us is Dr. Zebulon Miletsky, an assistant professor of Africana Studies and History at Stony Brook University. Professor Miletsky has received his PhD in African American Studies with a concentration in history at the University of Massachusetts, and his research specializes in recent African American history, the civil rights and Black Power movements, urban history, mixed race, and biracial identity. He has authored numerous articles, reviews, essays, and even including his book, Before Busing, A History of Boston's Long Black Freedom Struggles. Professor Miletsky has been awarded for his works, including receiving the Game Changer Award from the Long Island Area NAACP and recognized with the Town of Brookhaven Black History Commission. So with that, we want to welcome in Professor Miletsky. All right, thank you so much, Professor Miletsky, for being here with us today. So again, in this episode, my team and I really want to emphasize the importance of this topic and have the chance to hear faculty perspective. So to get started, the first question we have today is given your experiences expertise on this topic, have you ever observed that there's ever an impact in your overall classrooms and the dynamics between students when you share your knowledge and personal experience on this topic, or even the students who share their own experiences that they've kind of went through with systemic injustices?
Okay, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. That's a great question. I do see that. I have seen that. I've seen that more and more. It's coming up in unpredictable ways. That is to say, different from once you've been teaching for a while, I guess you start to see generational changes. That's what I call it. It's incremental. It's a little bit every day, but when you mark it by maybe 5 years or 6 or 7, 8 years, 10 years, you really do start to see shifts, and a lot of those shifts mirror the societal stuff that's going on. It's but it's something that I have to really lean in myself to listen and learn from the students, because you might think, with all the reading and all the studying and everything, the preparation and the years of teaching, you start thinking a few things, which hopefully we do as faculty, else we wouldn't be able to teach. But things that are coming up in real time, I guess, they do get reflected in the questions, in the interests, in the topics that students want to either pursue, and then especially uh, that our students are concerned about. But it's tough because you hear things that are unexpected. Students notions of race, identity, systemic inequalities, and current day political realities is very it's something they've come to on their own, before they enter my class, at least, right? They formulated these ideas. Some of it's gathered from other classes and other things, but so my first instinct is to want to try to correct sometimes or try to address, but I've learned that I really have to listen. I have to learn myself. The classroom really is a two-way street in terms of learning. If I'm going to be able to speak to the students in a way that addresses their concerns and resonates with the things that are on their minds and their way of seeing race, which is usually which is ever changing. It's ever changing. That's what I'm finding. Here in the 21st century, things have changed a lot, and so that makes sense. It makes sense that students today are not going to have the same notions about race than students I taught, like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe. Um, has it been that long? Yeah, I've been teaching for a little while.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight. It's very interesting hearing your perspective, and I agree with you. I definitely think things are changing in real time. There's definitely a lot of discussion and a lot of like apparent situation regarding notions of race and coming to terms with your identity. So with that being said, and that leads us to our next question, with having students of different backgrounds, it's inevitable to have some students who do not understand perhaps what they have been personally affected by. Do you feel a responsibility to then educate and advocate for the students who may not understand the impacts?
Oh yeah, I do feel that. I feel that very strongly. Sometimes almost too much, because you're not going to be able to change and reach every student. That's what I've learned. If I do my job throughout the course of a semester, there's maybe like 1%, or maybe one or two handful, two or three, that I just unable to really connect with or reach. But yeah, the classroom really, when done properly, can be a place for transformative thinking and transformation around these issues. It is a laboratory. I tell the students that right in the beginning of the semester. It's our laboratory, and the rules in normal society don't apply while we're in there, to some extent. I mean, of course they do, but we try, and I remind them too. Don't go out into the world and start speaking, acting, and doing as if some of the things that we learn in this laboratory in a perfect environment, sort of so-called controlled environment. But yeah, it's a different journey for each person. I've come up with ways that are getting better and better at doing that. For example, I started having students do like a educational autobiography, is what we call it. And it's just a simple paper that we do in the beginning of the semester, where students tell me their story, where they went to elementary, if they want to go back that far, middle school and high school. It lets me know where they're from. It lets me know what kind of educational environments they've been exposed to. Uh, my courses always focus on race and identity to some extent. So I ask them to, consider that while they're talking about these things. And they start sharing. They'll share some of their background stories. That's become a very helpful tool, because it helps me to kind of know, okay, the traumas maybe someone has been, actually that's what they are, traumas that they've been exposed to around race, either with a teacher or with other kids, or if they're a person of color, maybe they grew up, and they'll share with me, oh, we used to live in Brooklyn or something. And then we moved to Long Island, or then we moved to some other place, and then their whole environment changed, where they were going to school as only one of very few people of color, and that kind of thing. So all those things are critical to know, um, what approach is going to connect and work. And really, because it's really, I don't want to go this far, but it is kind of like it is kind of like in some cases, some people need healing and some reconciliation and stuff like that because of some of the things they've been through. So it's a big thing that thank them all profusely for sharing. Thank you for for sharing your personal story. Some of them are very painful and stuff. But in this journey, there are some things about race and politics and social justice and all these things that stay the same. I mean, ostensibly they are the same. We are the ones who change or attach to different things or connect to different things because of our feelings and emotions and political situations as well. So it's good to know those things. Um, and so I kind of I kind of sort of pride myself on that, trying to reach and connect. We've had some amazing moments, certain success stories you could call them. I'll even say some who came into the class who had prejudice and racist, not racist, but prejudice. I'll say discriminatory, sort of leanings, and help them to rethink them. We've had students who come in who are very politicized on either the right or the left, and how to get to some kind of common ground so that we can actually discuss and talk about things regardless of our political affiliations and all the strong feelings and emotions that go with that. So that's kind of like what we do in class, and it does work. It really does. I think it works pretty well, actually. Thanks for that question.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I love that you mentioned Brooklyn because I'm also from Brooklyn. And so I got to see a lot of like the systemic injustices, although I've learned about it, but I've gotten to see it firsthand through the political outreach that I've done by working at our senator's office. So I really appreciate hearing that insight from you. And that leads me to like a follow-up question, which is that how can we make sure that educational institutions are also upholding this responsibility to combat injustices seen within the educational system?
Yeah, that's a little harder. Especially at the higher levels of higher ed, and all that. In this day and age of the neoliberal university and all the different dynamics that go along with what universities are in 2024, and it also depends on the school, whether it's private or public. We're used to a public university at Stony Brook, um, and part of a big public system. And there's advantages to that. One advantage is that, the university doesn't have to go looking for funding every year. They're not constantly having to pound the pavement asking for donations and fundraising the way that private universities often do. The money is pretty much earmarked from the state assembly in large, in very generous amounts in some cases. And so it leaves the university sometimes with a choice about, I think, in my opinion, how it may go about dealing with issues in the public sphere and the public sector, because um, it sort of has the freedom, but the question is, is it willing to use that kind of freedom to put a lot of energy into, well, I guess, I'm asking, could it put that, use that kind of freedom to put that kind of energy into democratizing the spaces of the university, of a public university, and what all that means. Unfortunately, you got like some people who are saying we're a public university. That means we apply to a higher standard. We should be about, issues concerning a big socioeconomic swath of people. We should be concerned about issues of people who have been neglected or denied. We should be focusing on educating working class kind of families who, without the public university, may not may not have the opportunity sometimes to go to college or whatever. The other thing though is that Stony Brook has also become a flagship university within the SUNY system, so that also has its own uh, pressures and dynamics to bear. So all this is happening in the last several few years. So it's always a balance. I think it's a balance that the all universities, and then Stony Brook in particular must walk. Um, we can be aspiring to be a great public university, one that's competitive. I tell the students all the time, I'm like, made a very good decision coming to Stony Brook. Your degree is just going to be worth more and more and more as the years go by. It's like investing in buying a house in the right area, or investing at the right time. So that's positive. Unfortunately, though, we've had we have situations where sometimes that freedom of expression or freedom of choice in various ways is not always as open as we might want it to be. And so, uh, but you got pockets. The work that your organization does, the civic justice, is always it's been a gem. It kind of stands out. You know that we know the quality that's involved with this. The Center for Humanities, Humanities Center on campus, some other places like that, where issues around real issues of democratization and sort of celebrating our pluralistic society, one in which you have a lot of different people pursuing different aims, maybe not always in harmony, but finding some kind of harmonious way to reach those different goals. It's always it's a balance. It's a balance. I'd say Stony Brook's probably done pretty well. It's done pretty well, but not by itself. It needs to be pushed sometimes, and that's where student voice comes in. That's where faculty, even also, in fact, we have a union at Stony Brook. That is to say, the professors are in a union. That's not the case at all universities. So the fact that we have a union also is just another kind of pressure point, or a good in a good way to get us on the right track, to make sure the right things are being done, and that power that comes with when the legislature just gives you money every year, there's a lot of power that goes along with that. And so we need the system of checks and balances. And so you have certain, like the union or other groups, that perform that check on the power from just sort of running away from us. um, and certainly location matters. We're out in Long Island, and that is a historically conservative area, so there's a lot at stake.
Thank you so much for your response. I really appreciated that. I think also I kind of agree with the whole sentiment about Stony Brook, especially, and just as an educational institution, I think that there definitely lies a responsibility to just share knowledge and spread awareness about a lot of systematic inequalities. And I think Stony Brook is on the right path for sure in doing that. I also wanted to say I really thought that the educational autobiographies that you were talking about were really interesting. I think that that's a great way to get people to start talking about a subject like this, and also kind of reflect on their own experiences and kind of connect that to the themes that they're learning in class. So I think that's a really cool thing that you do. Um, and so I guess we kind of wanted to also get into systematic inequalities within like elections and just the voting process in general. So on to our next question. Within your research, have you encountered any systematic injustices within the electoral processes that impact other societal areas such as education?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. Um, it's hard sort of as you scan the various systems of democracy that we have, trying to find the sort of I'm trying to say the pebble or the pea in the you know the pebble in the shoe, so to speak, where the problem um, is not always easy because it's sort of hidden. Um, but yeah, I mean, like again, thinking about Long Island as an example, um, there has been a lot of uh, politicization around drawing district lines in terms of where students get enrolled or where students get go to school based on where they live. And there's always ways of sort of cordoning off a certain area, or I'm talking about in terms of master planning here, in city level to municipal level, but then in Long Island you got the counties and county level, and you got the town level, I guess it would be, with all the little hamlets and different things underneath that. And at the town level, they draw the maps oftentimes in such a way that disenfranchises certain individuals, um, that make sure that they're going to go to, say, one particular school, and then you end up with like a school that's like one the good school in the town. Everyone's sort of like, oh yeah, that's the best one, and then the other school that's like sometimes maybe around across, maybe on the other side of actual railroad tracks. But it's not always the case. But there's always some kind of, it could be a creek or border, some kind of border that cordons off that one area. And and it doesn't mean that people don't vote. People may be registered to vote. They might be voting in somewhat large numbers, but it's just sort of the way in America that we have skirted around some of the top level, say like Supreme Court level decisions, such as like Brown versus Board of Education, which has tried to desegregate the public schools. It mostly applied only to the South because it dealt with what they call de jure segregation, which was segregation by law. And what we have, say, in the northern areas is more what they call de facto segregation, which is sort of been brought about by other historical factors, namely housing segregation, where people live. So it's this elaborate web of a lot of different factors that affect different age groups. The students, the young people, are the ones that have to go to the schools. Their parents are the ones making the decisions of, say, where they're going to buy a home or where they're going to move. How many times have you heard people say, well, I moved here for the school district, or we bought a house here for the school district? Right. So decisions are happening, major decisions, life decisions are happening in people's lives. That is to say, adults are making decisions based on things like schooling. That is a major factor. I mean, deciding where you buy a house, that's such a big thing, right? And all that goes with that, the interest rate, the mortgage, the how much you're getting lended, the realtor. Did the realtor show you a house in the part of Long Island that you wanted to move to or see? And so this Newsday has done a great job. The newspaper Newsday has done a great job with some studies. They did a study where they sent realtors. That is to say, they secretly recorded realtors. I don't know if you saw this, talking with especially minority home buyers. And, you hear all kinds of crazy things, not just crazy, but actually like illegal things that by law they're not allowed to say and do, steering people to certain areas and that kind of thing. So race plays a factor, maybe not directly in terms of school enrollment, but it plays a factor in where one lives, and therefore it plays a role in schools and that kind of thing. It works a little different in cities, but the point is we're all still dancing around this business of race. That's really what it comes down to, and what different legislative bodies or different decision-making bodies, whether it be executive or legislative, at the town level or at the county level or at the city level, um, are basically, in my humble opinion, what they're doing is they're just finding legal ways to comply with the law, but they're finding other ways to, kind of get around it. And therefore, then people look up and they say, why are our schools so segregated? We we have, well, how did this happen? This is how it's happening. That's how it's happening. There's still that mentality of, you know, well, you don't want to go to that school. And people are legitimately also concerned about their children's future. They want them to go to good colleges and that kind of thing. And they're not willing to risk it on the project, the democratic project. They're not going to risk it for that. They want their kids to go to the right school. So they're like, I don't, although then you got some families who are willing to participate in the democratic project and say, okay, well, I'll try it. I'll put my student in a school that's not as good, so-called, but is more diverse, maybe, or that kind of thing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that, yeah, we still have a long way to go there. We still have a long way to go there.
No, yeah, it definitely did answer the question for sure. And I thought the way you put it, the business of race that we're seeing, like, and that has been going on for years, is definitely something that's one of the things that we're trying to talk about here. We have weekly team meetings every week, and we sit down, debrief on more research that we encounter, and every time it's like something new pops up. And the housing thing is definitely something that we've talked about along this whole semester. So along with that, I wanted to ask, since you touched upon like the redlining, how have you seen that or how have you noticed that these discriminatory practices and policies like gerrymandering, redlining, or even the notions of like the school to prison pipeline, how have you seen that impacts the political participation of students of color and even communities of color?
Okay, yes, yeah, good, yeah. Gerrymandering, right? That's the word I was trying to remember before. Thank you. Yeah, this is tremendous work that you guys are involved in. It's really, really, really impactful, and interesting. Yeah, so I guess, I think that, um, and I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the last part of the question again?
Yeah, not a problem. So how have you seen that these like discriminatory practices and policies impact the political participation of students of color and even communities of color?
Thank you. Okay, right. Yes. Yeah, that's a tough question too. Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, let's see. Um, there is this sort of apathy for sure. There's an apathy that has long existed, a cynicism, I guess you could call it, about the system and whether it works correctly or not. And the beauty of democracy is, one person, one vote. Everyone's vote is important and that kind of thing. But it doesn't work unless people hold that sacred, so to speak. That their voting is their power and their voice. Maybe for some people, one vote doesn't feel like enough power. I don't know. Or they feel like, my voice is not going to matter that much. Or they see themselves participating on a higher level. Maybe they have the stuff, like some of you all will probably end up maybe in elected office one day. They think they have the stuff too. Like, hey, maybe I could be a leader, a political leader. But they haven't run for office or they haven't gotten involved in the civic process yet. Or maybe they won't. Right? So all I know is that we have a tremendous problem, within minority communities about voting. There's a cynicism. There's, and it starts, and I do see this in the classroom a lot too. People don't care. A lot of people do not care about voting, and they don't see the importance of it. They'll spend you a good 20, 30 minutes explaining to you in sophisticated ways why you shouldn't vote, why it doesn't matter to vote and that kind of thing. So, not sure. I know that when say for example, Barack Obama ran for president, those we saw record highs in terms of, say, at least for African Americans, uh, uh, and the black vote. You saw the numbers go up pretty high. I guess that suggests something pretty simple, which is that when people feel like they have something to vote for, or something that's motivating their heart to say, okay, yeah, this is important. I want to vote this year, then we've got something. I guess what we have to draw from that is that because in these off years and in the years since, the voting numbers are going down. We have to draw from that people don't s- don't feel a stake in the society. They've been too marginalized, perhaps, or they've been too left out on the sidelines on too many issues to feel that they have an involvement in it. And what ends up happening too is, these issues bubble up and coalesce around one maybe particular incident, or one something incendiary that basically sets the community off in terms of, and then what we see is people expressing their political feelings in terms of destruction or riots or rebellion. That happens a lot. Imagine if all those people who were so angry about this or that issue, you know, brought that same passion to making sure that they vote, right, and bringing to the ballot box. Could have a very different situation. You know, it- uh, for African Americans, I'll speak for African Americans in particular because that's what I teach mostly. Uh, you know, not voting or not participating in the process enough, maybe say in election 2016, for example, brought about a different administration, one that ended up making a lot of changes in terms of nominations of judges at all levels, some of the highest numbers of new judges appointed, and at the Supreme Court level. And then the Supreme Court has made passed down decisions that have major implications for African Americans and other minorities. For example, affirmative action. That's an example right there of why people ought to stay connected and voting, because when you don't vote, um, you know, uh, the other side is able to make the changes that it wants to make, and you really have lost your say in terms of that. And that's a major setback. That was a major setback, say, for example. And then for women, Roe v. Wade, all these things, major setbacks that set us back, really almost back to the 1950s, and almost earlier. So all that work, in labor, civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, etc., and all these progressive movements really were really wiped out. You know, the other part, though, is that the system doesn't play fair all the time. And just one last example, like Obama had the opportunity constitutionally to select a Supreme Court justice, and he was literally just ignored. He was just ignored. Um, I mean, how does that happen? You know, how does that even happen? How is that even legal? But it happened. And so these are some of the kinds of things that turn people off legitimately too. They say, well, um, I mean, if they were following these kinds of things, that we'd had a much different makeup of the Supreme Court had the constitutional legal process been allowed to proceed the way it was supposed to, right? But because this is the equivalent of like kids on the playground and throw dirt in your face during the fight, dirty fighters. They don't play fair. So I guess what are we left with? We have to figure out how do we become more demanding in terms of our uh, issues. Maybe we have to become dirty fighters a little bit to some extent as well, with integrity. But it's tough. It's tough. It's not a nice warm and fuzzy kind of thing. And the people who secured the vote for us to be able to vote and to be able to do so, they fought long and hard. You know, that argument doesn't go anywhere. You tell people died for you to vote, like they don't care. So maybe it's because they don't know about it too. I try to, like, we spend time in the class. We talk about Selma, Alabama, and the voting rights crusade, and which resulted in the Voting Rights Act. The other thing is, Voting Rights Act has been dismantled. See, so all of these major accomplishments that were necessary add-ons to the machine of democracy to make things equal, right? Because left untampered with, the system tends to leave out certain groups because of the prejudice and the discrimination in people's hearts. So we need to rebuild, I guess, in the 21st century, some of those things to make sure that things are a little bit more equal across the board.
Thank you, Professor. That was very, very insightful. I think that it really touches on the importance of representation and the efficacy of the individual, and how those two decrease when you feel less represented. But going into our next question, being that your area of expertise is on historical Black struggles, how do you think that the failure of social systems has continued to fail American society, especially noting how these safety nets have been politically coded in a negative way?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You've had some really brilliant political strategists, because that's part of you got the people who vote, the people who run for office, but then you got this whole industry, of strategists and, people who run campaigns for their livelihood and stuff. And, they've been effective sometimes in making the PR point, or if you want to call it that. Uh, I think of Ronald Reagan, who, I think in his first, or at least his earlier run for president, I think, because he runs in 1976 and is not successful, came very close, but running against sitting President Ford. But he had he had somebody in his staff or whatever, who came up with this welfare queen. They called it the welfare queen sort of idea, and they identified this woman who was a real person in Chicago, who had like several kids and was so-called gaming the system, getting welfare, getting governmental benefits basically. And so pointing the finger at something like that motivates voters. You're tapping into a very powerful kind of thing that's already there, which is the need to scapegoat. A lot of times, society needs a scapegoat, somebody to blame for all their problems. A lot of people are like, okay, well, why aren't I getting ahead? Why haven't I moved forward? And so this is part of the problem with some of the, I guess, the myths of America, the myth of the American dream. If you keep telling people they're supposed to have an American dream, without having to do that much, for it and that kind of thing, that is just sort of promised to you. And then when people don't get it, or they're living in a trailer park, or they're struggling, working several jobs or whatever, they're like, I haven't had the American dream. Then you start looking around for somebody to blame. And then it becomes very easy to point the finger at minority groups or at people of color, because there's already an animus there in some people's hearts already. You're just triggering something that's already there. But that has a long history that goes way, way back, in the South, during slavery, of again, playing the race card, basically, right? And it happens when people can't win elections the fair way. Just the substantive issues are not moving people. the debates, the topics, and so on, and they take this shortcut. It's a cheat code, so to speak. Um, so yeah, so you've had, so people talked about welfare like that. You've seen, President Clinton is a very interesting example because he ran as a New Democrat, so-called New Democrat, um, and I guess a New Democrat meant willing to move completely to the right, and take the issues of the conservative side and run with it, because that's basically what he did. He was very effective in that sense. Uh, I mean, the crime bill in the 1994 crime bill that he signed into law is the reason that we have a major issue of mass incarceration today. The three strikes and you're out kind of approach to crime. He put, it was his administration put a massive amount of police on the streets, um, at that time. And the whole approach to the problem of crime, which is with more policing and higher sentences, we've paid a heavy price for that. A law written, by the way, by a young senator named Joe Biden at the time. So we're dealing now with the future consequences of some of those actions, which were politically expedient in order to get somebody like Clinton elected. This is before the Monica Lewinsky scandal and all that. But they also used to call Clinton, the first black president. So African American leaders got to do a little better, because that's a big oversight. You're calling this person the first African American president in an affectionate way, which black people are going to hear and also say, oh, okay, he's our president. Meanwhile, he's passing laws and changing things, including welfare. And when he ran, he said he was going to change welfare as we knew it, and he did. He made it. You had a certain time period where you had to get a job, you had to do certain things in order to stay on welfare. So it's like a whole new approach. And so it's very Reagan-esque in that sense. So, but yeah, I guess so. So sometimes some of the systems, some of the New Deal, I'll say things that go back to the New Deal, the welfare state, basically. The idea that there needs to be a safety net, that there, and all these things are being questioned, criticized, and so on, today. The problem is that capitalism, you never know what it's going to do. It's failed before. It has failed, and that's why a lot of those things are in place. And so people have short memories, because if we end up in another, I mean, even in 2008, we had a major financial crisis. And what we essentially saw there was welfare for big business. No one questions that welfare. The money that they gave to prop up the auto industry and to save, these companies that were too big to fail, as they called it. Where'd all that money come from, right? And no one questions corporate welfare, but we question it when it's, to an individual who may need it. And of course, the statistics are very clear that more white people, for example, use and benefit from welfare than minorities, but it's more politically expedient to point the finger and highlight one individual, defenseless individuals, by the way. How do you look like becoming president by just destroying the life of a mother and her children, so you can ride on into the White House where people do things like that?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of that. I think it really is so upsetting how this rhetoric is really just resurfacing every single time. And it kind of feel almost cancerous because it always just blooms right back up.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. You're right.
Thank you for sharing as well. I love the way you explained the reality of the American dream and how it plays a factor in the dynamic of our society. I was wondering, what measures do you think can be taken to effectively address these forms of discrimination and ensure equitable access to this type of information for all?
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's the hardest question of all of them. Yeah. Um, I mean, I think that yeah, that's a tough question. I think that education is helpful, um, because I see it myself as we were saying earlier. One mind at a time. You really do have to undo the effects of what America does to people's thinking. The Americanization process. I don't know, for lack of a better word, which the American dream is a big part of that, and all of the things that go with it. And what I see a lot in my students um, is what is passed down from parent, to child, from parents to their children. You know, especially say, let's just stick with Long Island as an example. People have found success. They've found and bought a nice house, big house or something. They live in a nice area. And so the children sort of really worship, wow, my dad or my mom did X, Y, and Z. They know. If they say it, then it must be true. And so people giving information based on their experiences and passing that down. And so it's sort of like this mentality of, well, the individualism of American society, that aspect of things, of the rugged individual, of I have to look out for myself first, and screw everybody else. That's really, like, if I had to like describe America like in one sentence, that would probably be it, right? And in that pursuit of happiness, or that pursuit of wealth and pursuit of success, um, no one seems to mind, stepping on somebody else to do that. That seems to be okay, right? And so, with our historical legacy of racism and slavery, and major, disparity in terms of equality, like we didn't even basically decide in America that African Americans were going to be able to be citizens of the United States until about 1870, or 1865, 1870. Um, you had a Supreme Court case, the Dred Scott case, which basically everybody always quotes Roger Taney, Supreme Court justice who passed down that decision. The quote that he said that the black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect, which is horrible. But overlook the fact that also in that decision, it basically said that African Americans aren't citizens. It says that they're not citizens of the United States. So all the time that black people from 1619 all the way up to the 1850s or so, when that case happened, all that time, you have black bodies and black people in America, and in this wilderness called North America, as Malcolm X called it, without any status, without any rights whatsoever. So to go from that to now, it's a long march toward this thing called equality, and getting the changes that needed to be made in order for people to take into account um, uh, discrimination, to take that even into account at all. And the good thing is that we have made a lot of progress. There are laws on the books against discrimination, and against and you also have commissions against discrimination, where one can, on a case by case basis, you can petition, if something has happened or one has been discriminated against. That's a big step forward. It might take a lot longer in order to get justice for those who have been historically discriminated against, but there are things in place to do it, but it's not going to happen automatically, right? We gotta at least use the one lever that we have of power, which is the vote at the most basic level. And then others, many others, are going to have to do more. As somebody said, there's no shame in being black, but it's very inconvenient at times. We have to do more, right? My grandmother used to say, we have to work twice as hard just to be average, right? We have to do more than everybody else in order to bring about the things that some people take for granted, in this American democratic experiment. And um, and I think history has proven that we're willing generally to do more. We're willing to take the extra steps that are needed. And then sometimes people get so involved that they become part or leaders in that system. If they can do it for themselves, they can do it and open the doors for others. And that's why we hold up, certain black leaders. I think of John Lewis, speaking of voting, John Lewis, who was part of Selma, and then later on went on to become a congressman for a long time from the state of Georgia. And when he passed away, we all had to really say, there goes a lion, of the House of Representatives, who was a voice for so many people, and had to give him the respect that he deserved. And someone from the other side might say, "Oh yeah, I don't know, whatever." But the thing is that whatever political side of the aisle people came on, he was fighting for both. He was fighting for you too, right? Fighting for these higher ideals of democracy and equality. So I think that we probably need more. However, we need more intervention. We need more commissions. We need more commissions against discrimination. We need more laws on the books of what constitutes a hate crime. We also need people to work on the backlog of cases that have piled up. Because I mean, there must have been so many um, people who committed hate crimes during the years when Trump was running, the 2016 to 2020. These things that were said and done, you know, are those prosecutable? How long does the statute of limitations go back to? Because there was a lot of things that took place. All of a sudden, we're now in a space where white supremacists are not afraid. They feel like it's okay to it's okay now again to be a white nationalist or white supremacist under the guise of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is important, but it also does have some limits. And we're certainly told that when we go to protest for our rights or protest for topics that not everyone agrees with. We're seeing that now happening across the board. So if the First Amendment has limits for issues like that are coming up now, for example, like the war and all that, then it also has limits for white supremacists. They can't just do or say anything on that basis. But yeah, so governmental intervention is needed, and at all levels, and that's the only thing that's going to make a change happen. But in order to get that to happen, of course, come back to the vote. We got to vote. We got to get those people in office, and we got to look at offices that we don't usually look at, like district attorneys' offices. They are the ones who choose who's being prosecuted and all that stuff. It's very important office that's often overlooked as something as not as important as, say, the rep, some of the other offices. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate all the wonderful insight that you've really provided for us. While you were speaking on this question, immediately I thought of the Martin Luther King quote, where it's like, the time is always right to do what is right, which is something I always go back to personally. And just because thinking about these types of topics, like the most important thing is that we continue talking about them, right? Because if we don't, the progress forward, the pathway to progress stops, which is what we see with, the overturn of Roe v. Wade. We stopped talking about it because we got it. And as much as it was great, as soon as we stopped, it got overturned. So we went backwards. So that's why it's so important to continue talking about these, to making sure that, stuff like this isn't affected, because it does target people, like you said, like your grandma said, like, you had to work 3 times as hard to be average, which is definitely true for a lot of people here in America. And I know we've had you for quite some time, but just to kind of wrap things up, are there any final thoughts, insights that you would like any of our viewers should take away as we kind of continue to navigate these challenges?
Yeah, and thanks again for having me. This has been a great conversation, great questions, and feel like I'm talking to some future leaders here for sure. One day I'll be knocking on your door to get something done. Hopefully, you'll remember me. But I think that yeah, you mentioned Martin Luther King, and yeah, exactly. We celebrate his legacy every year. Everybody's trying to come up with the best quote to really just capture, just it's frustrating in a way, because we don't, it's sort of like, well, what can I do? But one of the ideas that King also left us with, and he talked about a lot more towards the end of his life, which was this idea of the beloved community. Talked about a beloved community. And I think out of all the different things that King left us with, and there are so many, that's the one that we can use and pick up as a blueprint for where we are today. We need to tap into that idea of the beloved community. What does it look like? It's up to us, but it's one in which we regard individuals, that every person has merit and worth, that we don't take the shortcuts and the cheat codes, right, that have been historically part of our legacy. That's the easy way out, right? Anyone can, a person can do that, right? They can do that very easily. We've seen incidences of things like that come up. I do a lot of work about Boston. My book that I wrote is about Boston. It's called Before Busing, and they did a documentary on HBO about this case that happened. It was after busing, so it's not in my book. But in the '80s, Charles Stewart murders, and Charles Stewart basically, called the police and said, "My wife has been murdered." They asked him for the description. He said, "Yeah, he's a black guy wearing, jumpsuit suit." And then you had this manhunt, this massive manhunt all throughout the city of Boston, kicking down people's doors, challenging and all these kinds of things in the black community, all come to find out that this guy had actually done the deed himself. He's the one who killed his wife. His wife was pregnant too. It was a terrible, terrible story. But the thing is, what he did was he animated this old trope about race, which anyone can do, right? You see it in movies all the time, especially mafia movies, right? The mafia guys are robbing someone, and they say, "Oh yeah, I think I saw a couple black guys run that way." You could do that in America very easily because you're tapping into that already racialized historical experience that's there in everybody. So how do we stop people from doing those kinds of things? How do you stop people from uh, the beloved community? I think is the answer. We have to find a way to treat people with more respect, more dignity, and then when people who break those kind of communal norms, there needs to be punishment for that. There needs to be some kind of intervention to stop, to make that illegal, basically, and with the requisite kind of punishment. So we got the whole thing kind of backwards. Who's punished, who's wrong. There's a lot of people at the higher levels, white collar and all that, who are done more harm, that also need to be sort of stopped from doing some of those kinds of things. So everything's gone sort of backwards. But anyway, that there's that scapegoating again. and it's a powerful force in our society. It's probably done the worst. A president, people can run for president talking about, oh, the border, and people are just coming over the border and all that. Again, somebody to blame. That's basically something that came out of Nazi Germany too, which is blaming a certain group for one's problems. That's how that started. So it's a fascist kind of approach to things. So we've got a new problem in our American democracy now, which is fascism, honestly. Banning books, all that stuff comes out of fascism in Europe, basically. So it's nothing new. And so we got to look at the playbooks that they used to oppose it if we want to figure it out here. But I would put forward that beloved community as that's what we have to. If people are as committed to MLK's vision as we always say we are, well, there it is. That's the project, the beloved community.
Wow, thank you so much. That was such an amazing way to end this amazing conversation we had with you today. Again, we can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us and really sharing your insight and perspective. And yeah, we really hope you have an amazing day.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. And today we're actually joined by a returning guest speaker at the Center for Civic Justice podcast. Today joining us is Legislator Jason Richberg, representing the 15th District in Suffolk County. With your experience and your background, we really thought that you'd be an excellent guest for this topic today. So we can start talking about the large-scale impact, but also the local impact of this topic. And of course, before we begin, please introduce yourself so that our viewers can know a little bit more about your background and your initiatives that you kind of work on.
So first, I want to thank you all. Such a astounding group of panelists here. I don't know if I'm deserving of this. So hopefully the lights aren't that hot on me. But my name is Jason Richberg. I'm a Suffolk County legislator. I'm also the minority leader of the legislature, meaning I lead the Democratic caucus. I was elected originally in March of 2020, and I now serve as the minority leader since January of 2022. So this is my second run as the minority leader. And the main thing that I'm focusing on is listening to folks. We've brought in and figuring out where policy, where government, where our communities need us to go. So we started a maternal mortality task force. We advocated for affordable housing in the district. Water quality. We have a sewer referendum. Hopefully, it's going to go on the ballot to bring sewers into our communities. And more importantly, we do things here all the time that are not glamorous. They're not attractive. It's helping folks find housing. It's helping folks navigate government, helping folks navigate immigration services, and a variety of other things that happen on a daily and hourly basis, sometimes second by the second. That our job is to advocate and be the voice for the voiceless.
Yeah, that's amazing. When we were doing research on this topic and with you, of course, we really saw correlations there. So we really appreciate you coming on again. So just to get started, we wanted to ask you more of like a personal question concerning like your run as a minority leader. So first, like in your experience as an active representative for minority groups on Long Island, how has running for office in your district shaped your perspective on voter accessibility during elections? And would you be able to provide any insight on any significant institutional injustices that you have seen or experienced personally? Sorry.
So voter accessibility, I think it's a two-edged sword, right? Because I think we've made tremendous strides in making voting more accessible, right? But I don't necessarily know information is more accessible. But also there's a second part of that where it's about engagement, right? And I think while voting is more accessible, meaning you have about 2 weeks prior to election to vote, Monday through Sunday for those 2 weeks before, and then you skip a day and then it's election day. I think there's tremendous amount of access. Now, does the access equal for everyone? No, right? And I think that's important to understand. But as someone has told me over the last couple of weeks, some things are about an act of will, right? And I think we need to willfully be thinking about how we can make access more available. And on the converse side, we as residents have to think about how we can better engage with our elected officials, right? And ask questions of those who represent us, right? Who's the state assembly? Who's the state senator, right? One of the former state senators gave a lot of funding, so you're able to have a football stadium there, right? Kenneth Laval, right? But one of the things that I think, and I know this is sort of your question, Isabella, and I apologize if it's not completely. So one of the issues I have with our education system globally, right? Globally in America, as I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but is that we put a lot of focus on the federal government, right? Who's your U.S. senator? Who's your congressperson? Who's the president of the United States? But we don't put emphasis on the other parts, right? Your state representative. If you're in New York City, who's your city council person, right? Who are your, if you have an elected dog catcher, right? Who's the elected dog catcher, right? And we lay blame on a lot of things to our federal representatives, and some of it is just, right? But our local representatives handle a lot of responsibility as well, right? We talk about, our local government, our county government, we, in a partnership with the state and federal government, are putting wind turbines out in the water, right? There are some communities on Long Island who don't want those wind turbines, right? So the question is, like, how do we know, how do we navigate, how do we access, right, to your question, those local representatives? How do we understand how complex our government is and who to go to for whatever issue? Some folks, I mentioned immigration issues. I'm a county legislator. I have zero to do with immigration policy. Literally zero. But in the last week, we've had six folks come in here to get help navigating the federal process, right? And because I'm going back to the education system, right? And I'll systemic inequities. I won't even say racism. I'll say systemic inequities. Because of those systemic inequities, it's become a have and have not system, right? And because of that, if you know who to go to, you go. If you don't, you won't go, right? If someone isn't collecting the garbage outside of your apartment, right, who are you supposed to go to? And while that is not as important as, in a global sense, as important as, alternative fuels, if there is garbage sitting outside your apartment, that brings, rodents, that brings other things, that brings disease, and that could be your whole world right there, right? And so I think what we all have to do is do a better job of explaining the other levels of government and what they do, and especially in relation to us as individuals. I know that was a roundabout response, and I apologize.
No worries at all. That was great. We're gonna get into the next question with Rindy.
Thank you for sharing your insights. As someone who is experiencing this firsthand, it is very interesting that you say this because it's not something we often hear about every day. So this leads into the next question. Do you think that accessibility to polling stations are important to the democratic process of voting on election day? Why would some officials want to make it more difficult for voters to reach them?
So I will say in the state of New York and in the county, there's been an increased effort to make sure that polling places are more accessible, right? I think that's an important caveat to your question, Rindy. But I will say in other areas, right, in other states, in other regions, that access. So there's questions as to there are folks who have questions to the process, right? And anything that is different, people have a fear of automatically, right? If Rindy, you're wearing blue, right? So if you always wore blue, right, and someone handed you something that was a hot pink top, you wouldn't want to wear it because you're like, no, my color is blue. So I think in some respects, people have opening up a process because they don't know what it would be like, and they want more control over the process.
It was very interesting way to look about it. So thank you for sharing. Do you feel that it is the responsibility of any government, local, state, or national, to provide adequate services such as language assistance to voters?
I think it's the responsibility of all governments, not just for voters, but for people in our communities to make sure that they feel that they are able to access their government, right? And I think I know that sometimes there are language barriers, and some people will make the argument, well, people need to learn X language because that's the language of whatever. But I think there are inequities where people can't do that, right? Similar to the last question, there's inequities when going to voting, right? So we need to make sure we double down and not capitalize on folks' fear about opening up the process, right? And the same thing about language access. I mean, I understand there's a need or folks feel that there's a need to have an official language, which I don't believe we have in the United States. But I believe also that there should be ways, if you want to do it, if you want to say, well, everybody can only speak Latin, right? Then we need to make sure that we have adequate ways of communicating in other ways. One of the things that was the hallmark of the religious Reformation in Europe was the fact that no one could read the religious book, right? So they'd go to church at one point in time and they'd all hear it in Latin and they had no clue what the heck was being told. And they were just said, oh, okay, that's what we're supposed to do. And that's it. And so it was a daring idea to translate religious texts into native languages, right? And I would say that it's not so daring in 2024 to say the same thing, right? And I think, again, it goes back to Rindy's question before. Some people have an inherent fear of opening the process, and some people have an inherent fear of losing power, right? And I know that we should challenge that as best we can. And if you want to make sure that it's only, again, speaking Latin, then we need to make sure we have folks who will translate from whatever language to Latin so people can access their government.
Yeah, I really appreciate your response. I'm from New York City, so a lot of the public high schools provide a lot of language assistance. And in my experience, I've seen a lot of kids who are able to let the school know what language their parents speak, and then they only get like documents from the school in that language. And there's like a ton of options, and I think that that's really important, and I think that that's something that should be applied to voting and like within polling locations, especially throughout the United States at least. But yeah, I think that language assistance and voter accessibility is an important issue in general. And I think that that's something that's often overlooked, especially in like more maybe quieter suburban areas where there's not as much diversity. But yeah, I think that that's something that kind of leaves a lot of room for inaccessibility and some form of discrimination. And kind of just jumping off of that, I was curious if you could tell us anything about the recently enacted John R. Lewis New York Voting Rights Act that was recently passed in about like 2021. I'm sorry, no, it was enacted in 2022. Do you feel that it would be effective in the upcoming elections? And how would you compare like voting rights in like New York State compared to other states in the U.S.?
So when it comes to state laws in general, my my issue from a local legislator, from a county legislator's perspective, is, and it's not just the state, it's federal government too, that sometimes we pass laws that are well-intentioned laws, but the problem is there's no funding in them for local governments to enact them, right? And so what happens is, let's say on your campus, if I said, well, every kid, every college student needs to have a MacBook, that is now your requirement, right? While that's great, that person who can't afford the MacBook, right, is now stuck. Or if you had to have sheets that were hypoallergenic and 10,000 count, right? 10,000 count fabric. Again, maybe it's good for those folks who have allergies, but the rest of the folks who can't afford to buy that, it becomes an issue. And so we'll go back to the inequity question, right? So the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, it was an effort really to enact what the federal government did not, right? And while many folks had very nice and supportive words to say about John Lewis, and a couple of weeks ago, I actually had the opportunity to sit with the person who took that last photo in front of Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. He was there inside the Capitol during the attack or the insurrection. And so I will say that it was a positive reaction to do what the federal government did not. And I think it has helped in creating supportive ways for people to access voting. And I think it will continuously transform how people view voting. But I will also add that at the same time, we have a dismantling of the civil rights laws that were protecting folks outside of the state of New York. And so, yes, the John R. Lewis is going to help in New York State, and around this country, other folks are having issues accessing voting.
Thank you for bringing that insight. I think it really is so upsetting that the state is having to take that charge into protecting the constitutional rights of its citizens, and the federal government is very much like failing at that, in my opinion. Going forward, I have another question along the same lines. How do you think that voter inaccessibility reflects in other parts of society, such as schools and social services? And how do you think that there can be improvement towards more reliable safety nets? Or are these systemic issues permanently instilled?
Well, if I thought that all of them were permanently instilled, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, right? I think it's the job of government to adapt, right? I also think I view government as like a battleship or a cruise ship, right? It's not built to move fast, right? It's not a fighter jet, right? Fighter jets can move fast. They can go, Mach whatever. Cruise ships, battleships, they're not, but they're meant to withstand the storm, right? A fighter jet can't fly through a storm for a prolonged period of time, but a battleship and a cruise ship can, right? And it takes a lot of communication and everyone working together to get the cruise ship to move in a direction. And it takes fine motor in order to get to a destination or to make a change. So I think, so when you say in terms of education, so you could make the argument that we have less voter turnout in our school board elections than we have in other elections, right? And they're in communities where let's say you have 40,000 voters, you might get 1,000, 500, maybe 2,000 to vote. And the fact in New York State is a little bit different because it's one of the states where education is considered a right. That's not considered a right, it's not an inalienable right that the founding fathers put together. And I think that is something that we need to be striving for. Like, how can we have a better, more equitable education system, as opposed to getting back to those conversations I had earlier with Isabella and Narissa and even Rindy about a have and a have-not system, right? How do we get to that point? Is it making elections all at the same time? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a way to depoliticize these elections? I don't know. I think we need to get to a place, and that's where it's great that the five of you are our leaders, are our leaders, not of tomorrow but of now, right? Because you can really pontificate on those ideas, right? And not that we shouldn't hear in this perspective, but you all bring a different perspective as to how things should go. Whether we agree on it or not is a different story, right? I tell folks all the time, don't agree with me. I would rather you not agree with me, because then I can learn from your perspective. And so in terms of the social safety nets, I think there's a misnomer of who uses the social safety nets. I think the social safety net in general is not representative of what we need in different areas, right? So low income in the Bronx is not low income in Kentucky, right? It's not low income in South Central LA or in Albany, right? And I think we need to have a progressive safety net in general that better reflects the demographic, but also the income levels. I think that there are inherent inequities that could be fixed and can be fixed, whether it's with Social Security and the like, Social Security, healthcare, and a number of other things that maybe voter participation would help. But also, so people, and especially people younger than I am, so that would be you all, right? Don't want to join, right? Not joiners. Don't necessarily want to join a political party. You want to do your own thing and all that. That's understandable, right? And, I don't agree with what this person does, so I don't want to be part of it, because it creates an inherent unequal system, right? But I'll go back to the civil rights movement, right? You had to have people inside the movement, right? So at the same time, you had Martin Luther King, you had SCLC and SNCC and all those other groups, NAACP. You also had the Urban League, which was advocating for financial policies, right? But the problem is people my age and younger, maybe a little bit older than me, aren't joining these groups either, right? So when you don't join these groups, we start losing our political and community capital, because those are the organizations that built up the structures that we have now, right? That work, some of those groups sued so to make sure that there are scholarships available for women of color to go to school. And when you talk about political parties, right, on the other side, And I know folks will say, well, you want to remain independent. You should remain independent. And just because you like the Mets doesn't mean you like every player that the Mets sign, right? I'm a Knicks fan. There's a lot of stuff the Knicks have done over the last my years of my life that I do not agree with. But I'm still supporting the team, right? And I think we have to go to a larger extent looking at how all of us being on the team and bringing our perspectives to the team, just how the five of you are asking different questions, but you're all on the same team. You might all disagree on these policies, right? But you all are on the same team moving forward, right? Different levels in class. You have a freshman, you have seniors, you have juniors, right? You have folks all over, different majors, right? But you're all rowing in the same direction. And somewhere along the way, not just as American society, but as political parties, as groups, as communities, we stop rowing in the same direction. And I think the question is, how do we all get back to rowing in the same direction and making sure we are joining the groups and advocating in those groups and modernizing those groups so we fit? Because so many times people get upset with an organization and they say, well, I'm just going to start my own, which is great. But then you're losing the institutional knowledge that organization has, right? That's like getting mad at your grandparents for not teaching you the recipe, right? Oh, I want to make oxtail, right? Okay, well, my grandma won't teach me how to make oxtail. Well, I'm just going to make my own oxtail. Yeah, but maybe there's a reason why grandma had this recipe for oxtail, right? And or whatever dish, right? And so you're losing that history of the reason. And I think we need to figure out how, in many different ways, how we can row in the same direction. Does that answer your question? And we had a steady connection the whole time. See, look at that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. I think it definitely is super important for all of us to be, of course, not on the same page, because we're not, yes, the same page, but yet we are going to have disagreements. So I guess it is very much important to just, as a group, kind of figure out and acknowledge all the different points that you've kind of picked up on in terms of like picturing like what is it, pinpointing where are the issues, and kind of like the middle ground where we can all agree and then actually take action on, combating these issues, these inequities that we see. And then kind of just to wrap up the question, I know that you've already kind of, the insight that you've provided and everything has already kind of touched on like some advice for us, but we wanted to ask you, like, when advocating for social justice and electoral education, how can students and youth take steps to be part of change? And what would your advice be to those who are striving to dismantle systemic oppression?
So my master's thesis was on youth and young adult civic engagement. So I got to go reach back into that. So I think you all are doing part of it now, right? So I would say the first thing you need to do is you need to ask yourself, why are we doing this? And that's sort of a life question. That's not just about policy. That's about whatever you're doing, right? When you're friends with someone, right? Are we all like, if they're kicking it in the club, getting drunk, and you're sitting there like, look, I really do not want to be here, right? Right? You got to evaluate that. And constant evaluation is something that it's not a skill that we're taught in schools, but it's so critical for us to move forward in any walk of our life, right? So I would say the first thing is constantly ask yourself questions, not critically beat yourself up, but ask myself, like, why am I doing this? Why is this important? Is this something that I see, or is this something that we see, right? I see the importance of going on a trip. Does everybody else understand the importance? And am I conveying the importance to those other persons, right? As students, I would also say, first of all, you're not just students, right? for every movement, and I probably said this to you the last time, for every movement that's happened in world history, there have been people at your age at the forefront, right? And never underestimate that. And never underestimate the idea of one fool who has a crazy idea leading the rest of people to create, systemic change, right? And I don't mean fool in a bad way. Just like, somebody is crazy, right? Has a crazy, daring idea to think differently. And always do research, right? Something feeling good is great. Understanding why is even better. And again, while we're talking about, creating teams and policies and the like, to me, there's no difference from policy to your own personal life, right? Make sure you're creating that network of bonds between folks that keep you moving forward in that idea, and we'll analyze whether we're going in the right direction. I had a conversation with someone yesterday who said that they have a friend who they've known for 30 years, and they keep doing the same thing over and over again for 30 years. They bring people in, they give them advice, they help them out, they get them to a certain level of success in the local area. And then sooner or later, and they tell that person all of their plans, all of their thoughts, and whoever that new quote unquote flavor of the month is. And that person can't see that isn't working for them. And whether they were a kid or a teenager or a young adult or now a more senior or now, I don't know what's more than a young adult, right? Or as an adult, and then they're still doing the same thing. Because no one can tell that person, listen, maybe you need to reevaluate. And so you need to be open to listening to new perspectives, not necessarily compromising your ideals, because your ideals is who you are as a person. That's your core personality. But you will evolve, right? Rindy will not always wear a blue shirt, right? Sooner or later, she's going to find a new color, right? Maybe tomorrow it'll be orange, right? And that's okay. And you have to be able to forgive yourself for the changes that will happen and allow them to happen.
Thank you so much for that advice. I think what you touched upon about like asking ourselves why we do it, I think we all have many different reasons here, including yourself, as to why we do this, but that definitely does help us push for being passionate for what we do here individually, but also at the Center for Civic Justice. And that's why we really wanted to have this podcast today, just to make sure that...
Isabella, I would just add, make sure you share with each other.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? Because keeping that goal to yourself doesn't help. Right?
Yeah, definitely agree on that.
If I have a candle in a cave and I'm walking ahead and I got, and you all are standing behind me, if I don't share that light with you, it's useless.
Right. Yeah, which is why, that's exactly why we wanted to do this, and then also have it available to all of the rest of the Stony Brook students who, are unaware of this topic and, further, and then hopefully bring inspiration for them to reach the polls and, not just vote for the presidential year, but also at the local level, which is something you've definitely emphasized, making sure that the education process of this is available throughout, every election season, but also beyond that, which is very appreciated. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really loved your insights. I took notes along the way, so you covered a lot of really amazing points, especially like what you said at the end. I wanted to echo that because I thought it was really important, which was change will happen and allow it to happen. So I think that's very powerful. And also how you mentioned that young people are at the forefront, which is very relevant, and we can see it in today's time as well. A lot of young people on the front lines pushing for social change, and a lot of the themes that our project was centered on this semester was dealing with activism, because we're seeing a lot of that, not only in the city, but also on college campuses as well. So it's very important that we stay mindful and educated about that. And I also really appreciated you talking about the different perspectives and us cherishing that as our individuality, not compromising our own ideals, but also making sure that we're respectful of other people's perspectives and taking that in and learning along the way. I think that shows a lot and changes a lot, like within someone else's own character, but and helps us navigate who we are as a person and our sense of community. So thank you so much for sharing.
And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Again, thank you so much for being on. We hope that you enjoyed our interview questions, and yeah, thank you.
Let's make this a yearly thing. I enjoyed it.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much. We hope you have a great day. All right. So before we break for today, I just want to give a big thanks for our guest speakers for coming on today and sharing their thoughts on the importance of this topic. We also want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in, and we really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any further questions, you can also DM us at Civic Justice SBU, and make sure to follow us so you can stay updated with future episodes. You can also email us at civicjustice@StonyBrook with any questions or concerns. That's all for today, guys. We hope you have an amazing day.